Okay, ready to roll. Welcome everybody to episode 2 of what we're calling proper loothing. We're calling it that primarily because it's the way I do stuff. In the process of having these go by month, we're hoping to be able to have almost like develop a catalog of content that are geared towards the repair and restoration field. And in doing so, we also figured it would be good to kind of dial things back to basics. Last time we talked about electric guitar setups. This time we're going to be talking about the same concept of setups, but we're going to be focusing on the beast that is the acoustic guitar, which is why we're calling this the acoustic guitar geometry, saddle, and setup. The whole idea behind doing this entire series is going to be not necessarily to try to unpack every which way there is to approach a problem or a repair. I think that was one of the really cool things about the D&D shows when we were doing them, that we took one subject and we had tried to show as many different ways to approach it with lots of different people involved. This series is going to be a little bit different in the sense it's basically just going to focus on how I do these tasks and how I approach whatever repair that we're going to be talking about during the course of these episodes. Sometimes we'll be discussing an actual repair and performing the whole repair, kind of like last time we were discussing a setup and we went through the cases of doing a setup. When we do other subjects in the future, whether it be fretwork or whether it be structural work or whether it be touch-up work or whatever subject matter we're going to try to focus on for a given episode, we're going to try to do as much of it during the episode as humanly possible. And if it's too big a subject to do in one episode, we're going to try to cut it up and do it among multiple episodes so we can have this be as demonstrative as humanly possible, as opposed to just holding up a tool and being show and tell kind of thing. So this way we can get into the nitty gritty of it. If anybody has any suggestions or desires for subject matter they would like me to cover, you can reach me through my email, which is doug@guitarspecialist.com. You can reach me through the Looth Group direct message system. I don't know what that's called. But at the website, they have the direct message mailbox thing you can use. Or you can reach me through Instagram, of course, at Guitar Specialist Inc. So with that, we're going to jump right into looking at the acoustic guitar. A few basic principles that we talked about. And by the way, if anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself, put it in the chat. I'll try to monitor the chat as best as I can, but it's probably best to just unmute yourself so I can hear you, because I may not be looking at the computer. Couple of basic principles, just to reiterate a couple of things I said last time, which is, to me, the best sounding guitar is the best playing guitar, period. For me, everything starts and begins with the setup in mind, which coincidentally was last month's episode title, because a great sounding guitar is always going to be the most effortless to play. And I'm not going to, I proselytized on that last time, and I won't go down that into that cul-de-sac again, but that to me is the basis for every job that I approach, is looking at how to get the guitar to be set up well. That may involve repairs, that may involve some, significant structural work or even cosmetic work or, geometry work to a guitar, outside of, the cosmetic repairs that are associated with all of this. Sometimes it's just the setup. And here we're looking at an acoustic guitar. This is the Martin Dreadnought. I don't even know, it's a cheaper guitar. They call it the Rhodes series. So it's a Dreadnought inexpensive guitar that does not play very well. We're going to look at this as our guinea pig for the day. As I consider myself mostly a guitar mechanic at heart, to me, diagnosing a guitar in order to get it play better is always an exercise in discovery, as we talked about last time. And the numbers of what I'm looking at will always tell the story. So when I'm diagnosing a guitar, when somebody brings in a guitar for a setup, of course we can look at it and say, yeah, I can see, and I don't know if we want to switch to, let me just switch to the other camera. If I just go to that one. So I can see here that, we've got a pretty high action that's probably not coming through on the zoom, but I can see that the strings are pretty stiff. We can, if I sight down the neck, this way, if I'm holding the guitar by the heel, just pull the camera back. If I hold the guitar by the heel and we're looking down the neck this way in playing position, I can see that I've got a fair amount of relief. How much I don't know yet, but it's a significant amount of relief. I can also look past that and see that my neck looks like it's pointing pretty close to the top of the bridge, so I'm not dealing with, at first glance, an underset neck problem. So, I can see that I've got a guitar that needs some love, that needs some help. I will have already done the, if you want to zoom in on the guitar. I've already done, in most cases, an examination of the inside of the guitar, so I know I'm not dealing with any structural issues. I will not set up a guitar unless it's structurally sound for strings or a setup. So for me, the first step in doing a setup is not trusting my customer when he says, here, I'd like to have this guitar set up. Oh, you just want to set up? Yeah, okay. You start doing a setup, you pull the strings off, you start going through the paces of making all your adjustments, only to find out later that your strings are being pulled through the bridge plate, or that you've got loose braces in the bridge area that's causing the belly to come up, or you have a lifted bridge where you're getting behind the bridge. So the guitar goes through a full examination before we do anything. So I will be checking to make sure that we don't have any gaps in the back of the bridge or anything like that. I will be checking inside the guitar with a mirror to make sure that, we have all the braces intact and everything's good. Same thing with the back braces, et cetera, et cetera. For the purposes of our discussion, let's say that this guitar passed its initial inspection, that there's nothing wrong with it, and it just needs a good setup. So now let's talk about the setup. As it relates to acoustic guitars, I actually don't consider, by the way, Sharon is being my camera person today. So, hi, Sharon.
Hi.
I actually don't consider an acoustic guitar setup altogether that different from an electric guitar setup, with one exception, is that I don't have the luxury of do-overism. So like, for example, when you're setting the saddle height on an electric guitar, you can, 90% of the time you're dealing with screws, 99% of the time you're dealing with screws, moving saddles up and down or thumb wheels or what have you. And if you overshoot and go too low, you can always go back up. If you're setting the string length compensation for the purposes of what we affectionately refer to as intonation, and you undershoot or overshoot, you can always go back. So if you're shortening a string length in order to make it sharper, and then you overcompensate and go too sharp, you can always move it back to make it flatter. With an acoustic guitar saddle, we don't have that luxury. Some of the same thing applies to the nut of a guitar, where on an electric guitar, if we're cutting a nut and we cut it too low, we can't go back up. So that philosophy applies to the entire acoustic guitar setup. So that in and of itself Oops. That in and of itself is the one differentiator between an acoustic guitar setup and an electric guitar setup. So you have to be more careful about how you proceed, because the ability to undo what you've done usually winds up being a whole lot more work than just reversing the direction of your screw. So this guitar already has strings on it. It's a set of 12s. I don't know, are the pitches coming through? Can anybody hear that? I guess not.
Yes, Doug, they were coming through.
Oh, okay, thank you. So first step, before I even take the strings off the guitar, is to discover where we exist with the current setup that we have. So just as last time, I'm going to use my relief gauge to tell me what kind of relief is in the neck. Before I get started, I'm going to use that as one of my first tools. We're going to use my machinist ruler that we talked about last time. This, just to reiterate, is a Starrett. I forget the number. Starrett C305R. I like it because not only is it black, so I can actually see the numbers, but I can get all the measurements I need in one ruler for my taste. I have on one side 30 seconds. I don't know if it's focusing or not. 30 seconds and 60/4 on one side, and then on the other side, I can get tenths and 1/100ths of an inch. So if I have hundredths of an inch, and I'm at, whatever hundredths, if I'm at, 4/100ths, that's 40 thousandths of an inch. If I'm at 1/10 of an inch, that's 100 thousandths of an inch. So that gives me the measurements if I'm looking for something that's closer to, in this case, if I'm looking at a saddle here, I can see that this saddle is close to, it's a little bit bigger than 92 thousandths because it's reading at right about 100 thousandths of an inch, which is a modern Martin measurement. Earlier Martin guitars had 92,000 slots. Modern Martin guitars have 100,000 slots, for my saddle. So I can, quickly see what I'm dealing with in terms of either hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands. I don't need to go lower than that in the case of this. If I need to go lower than that, which we will, I'll pull out a caliper and start using those. So that's my second most important tool is for doing setups. Of course, a straight edge is paramount for me. And in an acoustic guitar world, I like to use both a 24-inch straight edge because I get to be able to tell how I'm projecting to the bridge, or if I'm looking just at the neck, I'm going to use an 18-inch straight edge just so I can read the neck itself. Those two are paramount to me. Suffice it to say that tools don't occupy the same space on a bench as a guitar does. That we covered last time. And then feeler gauges. If you don't have this, all of you should have one. This is Buck's feeler gauge set, made with handles for each feeler gauge size. The size of the feeler gauge is printed on the handle. It has this fantastic index that you can just drop them in. And they are labeled here for whatever it is. So if I'm looking for my 20 thousandths, there it is. And I put it back, presumably where you're supposed to put it back, and it'll be there waiting for me next time when I use it. This is my go-to. All day long, I'm reaching for this thing. I keep one at this bench. Sharon keeps one at hers. And I may be ordering more from Buck to have in other places in the shop. So then, of course, nut files. Here's my nut file box. I'm cheap, so I haven't ponied up for the new diamond coated files, but this is our nut file box. Just a collection of files that we've used over the years, time and time again, and you know, we hang on to them for as long as we can before we have to dispose of them. One tip for you: if you're cutting a nut slot, this is just one that I got recently for 130 thou. This is how they come when they're not cut. If you're cutting a nut slot, say this was the size I would need for a nut, there is a danger, of course, of you scratching the peg head with that. So obviously, not only do you want to make sure you're protecting whatever you're doing on a guitar with a piece of leather, however, I take one step further and I round over the edge of any nut file that we have so that, you know, it gives you just that extra little bit of clearance that I can be filing without hitting the guitar peg head. And that's pretty much the tools that I use for setup. There's not much more. There are a few things that'll pop up here and there, and I'll show you those. But those are, generally speaking, with the exception of adjustment tools for electric guitars and screwdrivers and what have you. So first order of business I want to know is what kind of relief I'm looking at. So here, I just get a quick read of where my relief is sitting at the moment. I'll get the feet out of the way. And here it's telling me that I've got a significant amount of relief. I've got about 25 thou of relief. You can't see the number Sharon says, but that's reading 25 and a half thou right now. Now, when I'm working at the bench, I just have one of these sitting nearby because if I need to re-zero my gauge, I need something flat to re-zero it on. I discovered that their long fret bar is perfect for the relief gauge because it's heavy, it's square, it just sits there. It's not that expensive, so I can have a nice reference to just constantly if I'm moving this number around and I'm resetting it to 0 and I'm using the dial indicator to measure differences in different spans for different things, I can always come back and re-hit my 0 just by sitting here. Otherwise, I would go back over there and use that surface plate that's on wheels. Well, I'm not going to zoom in, but there's a surface plate on wheels over there that I use typically when I'm doing my fret work. This is a great bench reference for being able to do that. I bought this primarily just for the purpose of being able to zero out my gauge and that's the only purpose it serves. I don't even put sandpaper on this or use this for frets because it just provides that nice surface for me. Was somebody asking something or was that?
Yeah, question. I noticed
Sure.
when you set your gauge up, you seem to be measuring from the first behind the first fret to about 14 and checking the neck at between 8 and 9 or 7 and 8. And
Yes.
I wonder, is that what you usually do? Is there other ways to do it? I've been doing it between 13 and 6.
Yeah, for me, this is the reason why. And let's talk about relief for just a minute. When we were doing this last time and we were doing this on an electric guitar, the other wheel went all the way to the end of the fingerboard. Because on electric guitars, there is no such thing, or should be no such thing as fall away. Fall away is a fiction on electric guitars. On acoustic guitars, we're all used to the idea of fall away because when the neck angle is set, of course, that neck angle is pulled back. Let me grab I just got to grab my ruler real quick. When the neck angle is set back, the neck, of course, is pulled and countered to the body, and the fingerboard extension remains the same. You follow me there?
Yeah, I do follow you.
So, you know, here, I just wanted to run up front real quick and grab my flexible ruler. So when we're talking about relief, just to reiterate something that I brought up last time, when you see pictures of this, and I just saw one on Instagram the other day when somebody was selling some toolkit for some particular brand of guitar. I don't even remember who it was or what it was for, but they showed the customary picture of relief as everybody shows on the internet, which is this or this, and they were talking about either having a neck straight, having a back bow, or having concavity or convexity and all of this type of stuff. And this is what they were demonstrating. And that has nothing to do with relief. Relief on any guitar is a one-sided solution or a one-sided problem. So when a neck pulls into relief, it's all on one side of the guitar that it's being deflected. This side of the guitar, being the most stable part of the guitar, of course, never moves. If we're dealing with a Fender Strat, it's of course bolted to a huge slab of wood. That's never going to come up and down unless there's a problem with the neck. If it's a Les Paul or a 335 or something with a set neck into a solid body electric guitar, that's the most stable part of the neck. Relief is the pull of the peg head forward,
Right.
succumbing to the tension of strings. So when I'm measuring relief, what I'm measuring is the distance to the end of the fingerboard, because the most extreme relief in most cases will be in the center span of the fingerboard, which if I measure the fingerboard at just over 17.5 inches, that's going to be here at the midway point, which is halfway between 7 and 8.
But didn't you just say that the extension is stable, and wouldn't the bend occur mostly at where either the 12th or the 14th fret meets the body, depending?
Well, you're right. However, if you think about a curve, if it's happening on here, the bend is happening on the whole neck. You follow me? So when I see that, the distance from here to here is where everybody makes the mistakes of drawing that curve. So in other words, if I'm looking at a straight neck this way, there's your peg head,
Yeah.
there's your heel, there's your shoulders, there's the fingerboard. If this pulls forward and creates a curve like that we measure from this distance to this distance, that's the full length of the curve. Even if this is stable and not being allowed to lift, and this is the only part here.
I see. You're not worried about a pure curve. You're worried about string interference, which is the end of the fingerboard.
Right. I'm looking at string pull on the neck,
Yeah.
causing relief in the fingerboard. That's
Okay.
That's the geometry of the guitar. The guitar, even though it's stable here, still has a high point at the other end. On an electric guitar, it's the end of the fingerboard. On an acoustic guitar, we have a fingerboard that's glued to the face that is affected by the body. That we're going to talk about in just a second in terms of the geometry of the guitar. But here, when I'm looking at, if I get that to settle down, if I'm looking at, get that out the strings, if I'm looking at that amount of relief, I like to measure it at the center span of the entire fingerboard. Now here, my peak is at the body joint.
Right.
But
And
that's still the center span of the board, because I also want to get information as I'm discovering what's going on the guitar. And one of the ways I get information is by looking at my dial, and I loosen this leg, and I move it to the end of the fingerboard. I don't know if you saw me do that.
Yep.
So here, if I move this from here to here, then I watch the number change. I started at 25. I'm still at 25. What does that tell me? That tells me that this part of the fingerboard has very little or no fall away.
Yep.
So my relief hasn't changed. If this number went from 25 and then it went to 19, then I know the fall away being registered there is a matter of fall away from here to here of 0.6 of an inch. And I can see how much of a dip there is. And that's part of this whole concept of gathering information while I'm looking at a setup of a guitar, so I can anticipate what's going to be happening. I can know that there's a peak over here, or if I know that there's an extreme fall away, even if I don't yet know why the fall away exists. It may be because somebody sanded in, maybe because the guitar had a neck reset, And if somebody had a neck reset and pulled the neck back significantly, but the fingerboard extension, of course, being glued to the face, didn't change its angle, then that could be the reason for the fall away. Or if somebody put a wedge under the fingerboard in order to not have fall away, that could be, of course, another reason. Another reason why you would typically have fall away up at the fingerboard extension, or maybe a rise in the fingerboard extension, is the geometry of the face of a guitar affecting the fingerboard. Let's talk about that for a second, since we're on that subject matter. When we're looking at the geometry of a guitar, of course, most guitars are shaped in a dome. We've all seen people bracing guitars, and we've done it ourselves, where you're working in a radius dish with the guitar face down, and you're radiusing those braces to have the guitar top sit in that bowl of a dish. Different manufacturers have different, different radii for, Gibson's a different radius than Martin, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But every guitar has some kind of convexity where you can rock back and forth over the dome. And that might be how much of a bulge you have behind the bridge and how much of a shape you have to the bridge. The same thing goes for the back of a guitar, where if you're looking at the back of a guitar, there's a much more extreme dish on the back of the guitar, either way, left to right. On most guitars, the top is flatter, but it's not flat. When we look at a guitar from stem to stern, from neck to or heel block to tail block, we see something completely different. That the top does succumb to the tension of string, the tension of the strings. In some cases, much more dramatically than others. Let me see if I can get this to stand up on its own. So here we can see that the guitar is got a different shape than the dome we would expect. Let me grab Buck's feeler gauges and one of the smaller thin ones. And we can see here that I can get through, change the position of that, move that over here so I can get up at the other part of the guitar. So here, I can see that I can get under the back of the guitar. I can't get under this area here because there's a peak, but then that peak that's in this part of the guitar, the highest part of the guitar, dips down in front of the sound hole over here, and then rises up again in the shoulders and comes into contact with the guitar here. So I have this gradual S shape to the guitar where the pull of the strings is pulling up behind the bridge, sinking down in front of the sound hole, rising up in the shoulders. If it's extreme, it's not very extreme on this guitar. It's actually pretty mild overall on this guitar, which is surprising given how inexpensive a guitar it is. But it peaks about here, comes down in front of the bridge over here, rises up in the shoulders. Now, what that can affect a neck by doing is by raising up the fingerboard in this area right at the body joint, causing a hump right behind it at about the 10th to the 12th fret. And that we've all seen when we get a nice action on a guitar and you start playing up by the 9th, 8th, 9th, 10th fret on the treble string, and it starts doinking out because it can't clear these frets because the frets come to a peak at this point. That's a guitar that may have an extreme amount of belly, a lot of dip because it's dried out, and a real significant rise in the shoulders. But that's part of my discovery, to see what's going on with a given guitar, to see if I've got any kind of significant S curve there or significant bellying across the guitar this way. And this one there is not a lot to that. If I want to then take another step, by the way, that S-shaped curve also affects our setup. If we're looking at the guitar body, we're here. There's our guitar body. Here's the neck over here. Here's the bridge area here. If we're bulging up behind the bridge, dipping down in front of it and rising up in the shoulders, we've all seen those guitars that the bridge seems to be, if you look at it from the side view of the guitar, tilting downward because it's riding that slope down in front of the belly of the strings. That's part of how guitars grow old. This is part of the geometry of a guitar. Just like, if you're in your 90s, you're probably stooped over and got your shoulders leaning forward, and you're hunched over in the shoulders and you're stooped. Same thing with an acoustic guitar. It succumbs from the tension of the strings over the course of its lifetime. Less healthy guitars, even more so. The way this can affect a guitar setup is if your bridge is leaning forward like that, so is your saddle, which means that your saddle may not be in the position it was intended by the manufacturer or by the builder, and it might be too far forward, which means you have too sharp a string length compared to where the 12th fret is. Your string is too short, therefore you need to elongate the string in order to set the intonation possibly on that guitar. So that's another thing I typically try to look at when we're looking at the overall geometry of the guitar, if you want to point back to the whole guitar. Next thing I'm going to do before I start looking at that area of the top, because I want to know what the measurements are, and I want to hedge my bet in terms of being able to do the setup, is of course we're going to measure the height of the strings. Now we knew that 25 thou was a significant amount of relief for this guitar, that if you did nothing but straighten out the neck, you would probably make up a good 32nd of an inch or 64th of an inch in terms of height of the strings. I'm going to measure the height of my strings from the top of the 12th fret to the bottom of the string at the 6th fret and at the 1st fret, at the 6th string, at the 12th fret of the 6th string and the 1st string at the 12th fret. The ones in the middle I don't care about because that's ultimately going to be set by the radius of my saddle. So I just want to know where I'm at. Here, you also notice I'm pressing down the 1st fret to eliminate the nut as even a factor in my string measurement, because I don't want to know what the nut's doing. The nut is, I don't want the nut to be a factor in my string height. As far as I'm concerned, a nut should never be factored into the string height. I'm reading about 9/64ths of an inch, which is tall enough to drive a Volkswagen under. Here I'm measuring just about 8/64ths of an inch. So I have a significant action. I have a significant amount of relief. So we have a pretty poor playing guitar here that that is going to be giving us, issues while we're playing. Obviously, not only are we going to be pulling the string sharp. The last thing I want to know in terms of numbers, and you can write these down. I typically would at the front counter, or if I'm going to be close to just doing a setup with a guitar where I don't have to remember them for later, I may not write them down. I know there are those among us that keep spreadsheets on each guitar's measurements for each customer. I don't do that, only because I deal with the guitar as it sits. The other thing that I use my relief gauge for is, and I just have a second one already set up for it, is I use it as a top deflection gauge. And this relates to how I deal with cutting my saddle. And there was a question a few weeks back or a couple of months ago on the Council of Elders that somebody had asked a question about, is there a way to kind of hedge your bet or a way to anticipate when you're trimming a saddle how you can achieve, fewer trips back and forth between you and the belt sander, because it seemed to them that every time they cut some material off the saddle, it's not quite there yet. They cut some more off, it's not quite there yet. They always are either undershooting or overshooting. I forget exactly the question, but it regarded this kind of a thing where I like to know how much top deflection I have on a given guitar so I can anticipate and even hedge my bet against, those extra trips between the bench and the belt sander. Partially because I want to, get as little exercise as possible, but also because I want to be able to get to the end result in fewer times that I've got to pull the strings up to tension. So here I use my relief gauge in a number of ways to give me the information I'm looking for. Let me just put that there and zero it. So let me get a zero measurement on this gauge as it sits. This particular gauge is set up. There are pieces that it comes with that are removable. Like, so this gauge, when I was reading the fingerboard, you might notice that I had just a precision point to point to because I want to be able to measure either right on the fingerboard or what have you. There are attachments that you can insert different attachments to it. So this allows you to measure something that's flat. If you wanted to be on a fret top, you could be doing it that way so you don't have to dance on the top of the fret. Or in this case, I'm going to use it also to protect the guitar top. So I'm going to get that on there, zero out the gauge, put this right on the top. And right off the bat, I can see I don't have a whole lot of top deflection from perfectly straight. I've only got about 0.010 of an inch top deflection on this guitar. So oddly enough, for an inexpensive guitar, it's got a pretty well braced, pretty heavy, heavily braced top that is quite stable under string tension from being straight. That may be an indication that you have a top that's sinking. We didn't see that. We still had a gentle curve from one end to the other, so there wasn't a top that was sinking there dramatically. Sometimes you see them sink into the form of a dish. Then the next thing I'm going to do is this. I'm going to zero out my gauge completely while the strings are at pitch. And then I'm going to use, if you want to back up so I can stand at the peg head. And then I'm going to use a string winder and I'm going to loosen the strings completely. So when I was at zero, I'm loosening the strings from where I was to where they're completely loose. And I'm watching the top sink or the top deflection reduce. Now I'm about 26 thou of reduction in the top from where I started to where I ended, which isn't a lot. There isn't a ton of top deflection here. It's about 26 thousandths of an inch, which I've seen worse. I've seen a lot worse. I've seen more stable. I've seen other guitars that are quite more stable than that, depending on how well they're braced or how stiffly they're braced or what have you. But this now gives me an indication of how far down the top is going to drop from strings on to strings off. So when I'm cutting my saddle, I don't wind up cutting it too low because I know the top is going to rise as a result. Or I can hedge my bet with what I'm going to show you what I do now. So I already know that this top drops 25 thou. In this case, it could be a little more than that. I've had some tops that drop from strings on to strings off as much as 60th hour, even more. And that's significant because if you think about it, 31 thousandths is a 16th of an inch. And if you're taking a material off of your saddle, we all know the typical setup math that if you're at 6/64 here and you want to be at 5/64, you need to remove a 64th, which means you need to remove a 32nd of an inch from your saddle. If a 16th of that gets overshot because I'm not paying attention to top deflection, I can walk myself right into having to make a new saddle when I would rather have not because I'm just dealing with a customer's setup. So that's the reason why I measure top deflection. Again, this whole part of a setup for me is gathering as much information about the guitar so that when I actually start making adjustments, I can do what the guitar needs rather than, strings on, up, not enough, strings off, take the saddle out, go to the tool room, cut a little bit more, come back on, string up the guitar, get it to pitch. No, not enough yet. And then go and you do that dance where you're constantly massaging the guitar to get where you want to. I'd rather the guitar tell me where it needs to be. Now, the last tool, which we haven't discussed, we were discussing a little bit before we got started, is one of these. I have a prop jack here that I'm going to, let me get into the guitar. Let me move this out of the way for the moment so I don't drop it on the guitar, that I am going to put inside the guitar, squeeze it in place right behind the bridge pins, right in the center of the bridge, right behind the bridge pins. And I doubt you're going to be able to see it. Let me try getting the phone where I can pop inside the guitar and have a look-see. So there, I don't know if you can see in there. So I've got it. Yeah, you can see the bottom of it. I doubt I'm going to get in there. Maybe. There we go. So that's right behind the bridge pen, sitting on the bridge plate for a reason. So it's going to give me some stability, and so it'll give me the opportunity to cheat when I'm doing a setup. I can also use this trick when I'm doing a neck reset, because it's hard to sometimes, when you're doing a neck reset, to anticipate top deflection when you're judging the pitch of the bridge, the pitch of the neck towards the top of the bridge. We're obviously always doing that with strings off the guitar, but then we do a neck reset where we get as much material off as we think we need. Then we go to string up the guitar and we find out, we didn't get as tall a saddle as we were hoping to because I didn't anticipate how much the top was going to belly because of the pull of the strings. So at the front end of the job is when I'm doing this kind of an interaction with the guitar so I can see what kind of deflection I have. If I now put I don't know if we can do this with the camera at the same time. I'm going to try to. So if I now take a look at where I was at 0, or I was at 26 thou of negative relief before I put my my prop jack in there. And now I'm just going to start extending the prop jack. If you could take the camera out. And try to see that you can see the front of the gauge. I don't know if that's gonna, maybe I can turn on this light. Maybe that'll help.
A lot of glare with the phone.
Maybe that's not, get rid of that. Can we see the numbers? Did everybody see the numbers?
Yeah, we could just about see 20,000s there, Doug. Now the screen looks blank.
Oh boy. Let me try turning this off. No?
21.
Very faintly, 20,000s. barely.
Okay. So you can see that the numbers are there. Maybe if we pull it back a little bit, or there we go.
That's it. Minus 19.
We hold it right there. So I'm extending the prop jack at this point. It's not locked yet. Here we go. So now I'm extending the prop jack up, pushing on the bridge plate. Now my top, yep, let me grab the phone. Just look up. My top, there we go. My top is virtually, with the exception of a half a thou, my top is exactly the same shape and height that it was against the sides as when the strings were at tension. So for me, this is a cheat. I get to keep a prop jack in there, cut my saddle, do my measurements for my saddle height with the top deflected to the point where it was when the strings were on the guitar when I come to doing that part of the job. And I'm much more able to closely dial into the guitar before strings are on there without as much fiddling towards the tail end. That's just a way that I do it to be able to get the guitar, closer to the point where I need it to be in the final setup before I begin cutting material off the guitar. Because remember, the one important part of an acoustic guitar setup is that we don't have the luxury of dealing with any kind of do-overs when we're taking material off. So here's my version of measure twice, cut once. That here I want to be able to get the top to the same deflection that I had before. If I'm doing it for the purposes of a neck reset, my top is now bellied exactly as it was before. Then the profile of the top is not sunken to the point where I can, undershoot or overshoot my saddle. And this gives me some measure of comfort that I'm going to be dialing in closer to where I need to be. All right, so first step in doing the setup, do we have any questions that are popping up? So far, that's pretty self-explanatory. Let's first get strings off the guitar and a fresh set of strings on the guitar. So that if the strings are loose, I can pull the strings off. I have all my tools away from the guitar at this part of the bench, or I would be using a hospital bed table, using a parts box over here to put my parts in. No, the table's going to be in our way over here if we try to do it. Normally, I would just pull a hospital table right up to the bench, but since we're both standing here, I'll just do it over there. Take my strings off. I did not measure the height of the nut at that point because I probably should have, but I could tell that it was pretty stiff. So what it was compared to how much relief we had a significant amount of relief that I didn't think it was necessary because I'll find out when I put strings on the guitar. If you want to back up a bit. Very quickly, I'll clean up or treat the fingerboard if need be. So I'll clean up the fingerboard. Mineral oil is fine. Lemon oil, whatever version of lemon oil you want is fine. I don't even remember what I'm using. Wegmans or something, or the Form Bs or something. That this is probably this given this is probably a rich light fingerboard, so I don't even know if it's necessary to do this. But if this were an acoustic guitar with an ebony fingerboard, we would put a little bit on our cloth and not on the guitar. I don't saturate fingerboards with lemon oil, just, 1 or 2 drops is more than enough. That's all it needs. Clean up the fingerboard if I choose to at the time. I'll also go about pulling my saddle, doing the same thing to the bridge. Then I have my magic block, a foam block wrapped with an old t-shirt that has about 2 years at last count, maybe more, of oil and wax from doing refrets and whatnot, carnauba wax, built in there, and just be able to clean all of that up. If I needed to get rid of, DNA on a guitar, I don't necessarily like using razor blades because it scratches the guitar. I do like using these because they work great on fingerboards, except they're too thick. So I cut them into small strips just with a razor blade and a ruler. And they wind up being the greatest thing in the world to be able to take 600 grit or whatever this is and quickly sand away any of that grunge. Get a nice sheen, fret to fret, it'll fit all the way up. If I want to go to the 24,000 or even the 12,000 to get a kind of a shine, I can do that very quickly. Go all the way up to the end of the guitar, and it'll fit evenly between the frets all the way up here. So I clean up a fingerboard in no time. Then we take a polishing stick, take our fretboard guard. I'll start over here, polish up my frets. These frets aren't that funky, kind of clean. Sharon said I should do this faster. Anybody falling asleep while I do this? All right, frets are clean. It's ready for strings.
Hey, Doug,
Yeah, shoot.
I had to step out for a minute. Did you check with a fret rocker before you do that? Do you do that routinely on a setup?
Oh, I do that on every setup. I do
Right.
that on every guitar that comes to the front door. I check with a fret rocker first. I should have mentioned that earlier. Thank you. Because if a guitar's frets are not level, then the guitar is not a good candidate for being set up. And I'm in a position where I'm going to be forced to disappoint a customer, and I don't want to be in a position where, so I will check to make sure that that's perfectly level all the way up, and I'm not getting any fret rocking. This guitar I did check when I first pulled it out, and that's actually really surprising for such an inexpensive guitar. It's perfect almost all the way up.
So at that point, you will detour into checking whether they're loose, maybe pounding a few down, gluing, and then a proper fret dress if you have to.
Well, at that point, of course, you're taking into condition of the frets too. If you got a lot of fret wear, then you're talking to your customer about possibly doing, fret level and crowning, or you may have some frets to seat. If I have any frets to seat on a guitar that are popping up, then we're talking about how many. We're talking to the customer about whether or not it's better money spent pulling them out and putting new ones in. If you have one or two frets that are peeking up out of their slots and you can reglue them, I know if I don't do partial refrets. I do have occasionally somebody will come in and I can only find one or two frets that are rocking. And if it's just one or two frets, maybe three frets, I'll talk to the customer about saying, look, I can chase them one fret at a time, and then you're just paying me a per fret price, which keeps the bill down.
Yep.
Rather than doing a full level and crown. But if we're getting more than, half a dozen, all over the fingerboard, then you're probably just better off at the end of the day, instead of charging a per fret price, you're better off just doing a full level and crown. If you've got frets coming up all over the place, then you're better off doing a refret. But yes, I do check the frets before the strings go on and make sure that the frets are in a good position to be able to be or healthy enough that the guitar is going to get a good setup as a result. So let's go back to our other release gauge that we're going to go back to, measuring at the body joint here. And let me zero this out. So before, one of the things we noticed that when we measured the string relief or the neck relief with strings on, and there's a reason why I always measure it to pitch, because, and I showed it last time, that I very often also measure right after the strings come off, because I want to know, one of those pieces of information is how much strings of a particular gauge are pulling on the neck. And if I want a quantifiable number of what that's going to be, this is where I find out what that is. So here, if I'm measuring this relief here, let me make sure I am at zero, because I was moving that around a little bit. I am at zero. So here, when I measure that midway point at the body joint and right beyond the 7th fret, I'm measuring it at 10 thousandths of an inch. You probably can't see it on the screen, but this is measuring 10 thousandths of an inch. Does anybody remember what my relief was when the strings were on? I think we were at
25.
we were at 25 thou. So I could either do the math where I can dial the neck into where I want it to be by just taking 25, subtracting 10, that'll put me at 15. If I want to be at 5, I'll subtract another 10. Or I can do just the exercise of just bringing my guitar to 0, knowing that it's going to pull in 15 thou at this point. Or you could get this, if you wanted it to have the neck pulled to possibly 5 thousandths of an inch, I would then set this to a back bow of a certain amount. But just for the sake of this argument, I'm going to set the neck to 0 before I even get strings on the guitar, because I want to kind of start from a 0 point. And plus, when I am measuring my final relief on a guitar, I'm going to be doing it in playing position. This is just the working position. So I'm going to get the neck to about as straight as I can get to start with. And then when I do get strings on, if it pulls it into 15 thou, that will give me the confirmation of how much the neck is pulling and how rubbery a neck I want. Again, to me, information is all important while doing this because I get to get an idea of how healthy a guitar is, whether or not there's going to be any other work that's necessary to do. Or I can try to cheat at this point and put myself into a back bow of say 5 thou, maybe even more, 10 thou, 8 thou, somewhere in there, so that when the strings do pull, I pull myself into straightness and just to the amount of, 4 or 5 thousandths of relief I'm looking for. But it depends on my mood, depends on what I'm looking for. Here I might want to start because I have so many other things to do. I might want to start at 0 in the working position because my saddle is going to be coming next. So now my guitar is ready to be set up. Here is my drawer where all of the truss rod wrenches are. That's all of that stuff is right handy where I need it. So this guitar is ready for a string and having it set up. But before I do the last thing, before getting the strings on the guitar, I'm going to prepare the saddle for having work done. Now, this is, I need to spend a little bit of time talking about this part of it. So when we're talking about setting up the guitar and the nature of the saddle as it relates to the acoustic setup, if we come over here, let me just do this for the sake of talking. Of course, the saddle is crucial to an acoustic guitar setup. It's also the part that can't be undone if you've taken too much material off, if you've misshapen the saddle, if you get your calculations wrong. Of course, fit and finish are important. That's a nice snug fit in there. We do have a pickup under this one, so I don't want this pickup over compressed. We've all seen the pictures of, myself included, picking up a guitar by the saddle and then being able to remove it. I usually do stick to that methodology, even when there's a pickup under the saddle. However, this is the saddle that say it came with the guitar, and I don't feel, and it fits fine. It's not wiggling around. It's a fairly snug fit. I'm not going to get persnickety about how good the saddle is, and I'm not going to necessarily suggest to the customer that he needs a new saddle just because I can't pick the guitar up by it. But it's not moving at all. I can barely budge this. So it's not wiggling in the saddle slot. I have good contact and all of that type of stuff. Herein lies the problem. If we look at the scale length of a guitar, here's our nut. And remember, just to reiterate something we had talked about before in last week's, we talked about, just to do a refresher, I call the setup box. And there are 4 general parts to a setup. There's the neck relief. There is the string height at the saddle. There's the string height at the nut. And then there's string length compensation, which of course is how long the string is in relationship to not only the scale length, but the height of the strings at either side and how much you stretch the string in order to depress it at the 12th fret. And there's going to have to be an offset in order to make sure that that's in tune with itself. We'll come back to that later on an acoustic guitar. Then we talked about things that are inside and outside the box. There's a lot more outside the box on electric guitars, like pickups, hardware, and all of those kind of issues than there are on an acoustic guitar. An acoustic guitar is pretty much, you get what you see at this point. We're pretty much dealing with this situation where we're dealing with the nut height, the saddle height, neck relief, and string length compensation. For me, order of operations is key to doing a setup. First and always first is the neck relief when we're doing the final setup. Second and always second is the saddle height. Then only comes the nut height, and then fourth is string length compensation, because each change will affect the other possibly, no matter what we're changing, and they'll have an effect on each other. This way, I'm going to make a mess of this whiteboard in a second. So if I have a neck relief of, say, 5/1000ths of an inch, and we saw before that we had a neck relief of 25/1000ths of an inch, and I set my nut height first, or I set my saddle height first, and I haven't set my relief, then I'm asking for a significant change that would take place that's going to affect both of these items if I don't set this first. If I set this first and then I set my nut height, you know, I'm the last thing in the world I'm ever interested in doing is calling anybody out, but there are guitar manufacturers I've heard of that the first thing they tell everybody to do at their final setup line is do the nut height. That's the first thing they do. If that's the first thing you do, and you have what we had over here, which was when we measured this before we did the relief at 9/64ths of an inch, and we want to be at 5/64ths of an inch, and we were at mine, that means that 4/32 of an inch are going to be removed. Let me do that so we can actually read it. That means 4/32 of an inch are going to be removed from the saddle height. If I remove 4/32 of an inch, that's 312 thousandths, or that's 31 thousandths, or 0.312 thousandths of an inch. That's 31 thousandths, almost 32 thousandths of an inch for each 32nd. If I times that by 4, that means if I reduce the saddle by 125 thousandths in order to get my action where I want it to here, there's obviously, when we're dealing with scale length, there's an 1:18 ratio by definition, or 17.817 if we're talking about fret placements. But there's a 1:17 ratio. I, for the sake of easy math, divide everything by 4, so I can say that there's a 1:16 ratio as it relates to the first fret compared to the saddle. So if I reduce this saddle by 125 thousandths of an inch, if I divide that by 17.817, which is where you find the first fret, you're going to take off 7/1000ths of an inch of height off your high E string. And if you've set your nut to where you think you want it, which is only what, 10 or 12 thousandths of an inch above the first fret, and you reduce it by 7/1000ths, you're going to have a string that's practically sitting right on top of the first fret. So that's why order of operations means everything to when you're doing a setup on a guitar. So back to our saddle discussion. Here's the conundrum with a saddle on an acoustic guitar. We can see here that this saddle is compensated at the factory. It has an offset for the B string, an offset for the E string. These 3 strings are all kind of pushed somewhat forward, and then the E string is pushed really far back. And so that's a saddle compensation that was done presumably at the factory for a factory setting. If we took a saddle top, we'd be looking at the high E string somewhere in here, the B string somewhere in here, the 3 inner strings somewhere in here, and this one back here. So we have that very familiar kind of wacky, you know, shape to the top of the saddle. Some manufacturers have that, you know, that lightning bolt looking thing at the top. I've seen time and time again somebody take a saddle blank and then take and just kind of trace the same shape into their new donor saddle if they're making one and hope for the best. That's no way to set string length compensation in my book, because I can guarantee you that you're going to be wrong when you're done. Because chances are, for most string gauges, this is already wrong. This is just a one size fits all for most guitars. Most of my customers want their guitars to play in tune. And we've all had the customer that has brought the guitar back because they've noticed that their Peterson tuner, which I'm sorry, I missed most of that discussion on the Looth Group this week. Most of them know that they can measure their intonation with their Peterson tuners, and they'll show up at your front counter with a complaint that their B string or their G string or their D string is 23 thousandths of, or 23 cents sharp or 6 cents sharp or what have you. So the problem is this as it relates to saddles. We know that in this case, if we ran our numbers, if the numbers wind up holding, they probably won't, because we were measuring the height of the strings with the relief being so significant. So it'd probably be smaller than the 9 that it was. But let's just take that number at face value. If we were at 9/64ths of an inch at the 12th fret, and at the saddle, and we want to be at 5/64ths, let's say, that means we need to remove 4 30-seconds from the height of the saddle. Everybody's clear on that math? That's not a mystery to anybody? If it is, don't be bashful about speaking up. But if I want to get to 5 from 9, I need to remove 4/64ths from the action at the 12th fret, which means I need to double that at the saddle and reduce the saddle height by 4 30-seconds. However, if you do a cross section of a saddle at the B string, let's say, or if this is the E string or the G string or wherever it is, and you need to remove 4 30-seconds off the top of that saddle, and then you find out that your string is sharp and it needs to move back any length of string, that means that the string is going to wind up being lower for that string at that point of the saddle, which means we've walked ourselves right into making a new saddle. And that's always been the conundrum with doing acoustic guitar setup. When you set the action of the strings, afterwards, you either live with the quote unquote intonation, or the correct term for it, string length compensation, where it is, or you make a new saddle. But now you have to call a customer and say, well, I know we started off with a really tall saddle, but now I have to make you a new one, or you have to eat it. And nobody likes doing that either. So for me, what I do first, before I start figuring out how much material I need to take off the saddle, is I need to prepare the saddle for material removal. And this may seem somewhat counterintuitive, but it's always been my philosophy that I'm being paid to set up a guitar, so I might as well set it up rather than just hope it's right when it's done. So when I take this saddle, before it goes in the guitar, now we're going to have to go to the tool room. Yeah. Sharon's going to follow me to the tool room. So I'm going to take the saddle to the tool room. Sharon's going to follow me. So first thing we're going to do, no, I'm just going to have you hold it. So the first thing I'm going to do is, if this is the treble side here and this is the bass side here, is I'm going to cut the top of this off, because I want to cut it off in such a way that I remove the compensation, because I don't trust that this compensation is correct. In fact, I'm pretty confident that it's not, just dealing with it from experience. And then if I'm in a position where I get my final height, And that B string, if you can see where it's compensated to, I don't know if that's coming clear. If that B string is where it's compensated to right now, if I draw a pencil line on it, maybe you can see it. But if that B string is compensated to there, I think we can see that. If that B string is compensated to there, and that winds up being flat, and I need to move it forward, I'm actually going to wind up reducing the height of that B string, and I'm just going to mess up my entire action for all of the strings, and I don't want to be in a position. I already know I have a saddle that's way too tall for the guitar, that if I merely reduce the saddle height from the bottom of the saddle to get to my final height, then I've lost the opportunity to adjust the string length compensation to get an in-tune guitar. So my first cut is always removing the compensation so that I can adjust it myself rather than hope that Martin was right or Taylor was right or or Collins was right or whoever's saddle it is, because 9 times out of 10 they're not. They're one size fits all. My favorite tool for holding saddles is that. This is a cobbler's tool for stretching leather. It works wonderfully for holding saddles. I can hold the saddle its full length. It gives me something that, come over here, that I can rest right on my belt sander. I can adjust my angle back and forth as I need be, and I can just cut the saddle top off with a little bit of an incline, just a hair of an incline towards the leading edge of the saddle, because I want all of those strings to be sitting on the front edge of that saddle. And we'll draw a picture of that in a second. Let me grab a mask. You're probably going to want to do this from the side so you can see past my arms. So hopefully you'll still be able to hear me while the belt sander is going and the dust collector is going. But here we go. So now Was that noisy for everybody, or did Zoom cancel that out?
It wasn't bad at all.
Okay. So now I'm just going to take the leading edge just in about, a few thousandths of an inch off the front edge, so it's not a sharp edge. So now I have a saddle that is 16 thou or 16-inch radius. It gives me, and I don't know if Zoom is going to pick this up, but it gives me a very slight incline to the leading edge of the bridge, so that the strings lead exactly at the top, and it's so minute that it's almost perpendicular. But it's just so the strings hit the back of the saddle, and when they leave the leading edge of the saddle, when they leave the saddle, it's actually leaving on the front edge of the saddle, and it's not peeking up from the back. So that's my first thing that I do for most acoustic setups, because I need to make sure that I can set the intonation on the guitar, so that the string length compensation is actually correct for that instrument. So now I'm going to put the saddle in, and I've taken some material off. Remember, I have a straight neck now and the saddle height to where I generally want it. I use a 30-inch straight edge, and I just quickly give myself an eyeball as to where I'm going to wind up in terms of saddle height above the 12th fret. I'm still a little on the tall side at 5/64, and the bass side I'm a little bit more, so I don't need altogether that much in terms of material being removed, because I'm taking a lot of the material off the top in order to compensate the saddle when that part of the job comes. Okay. So let's get some strings on the guitar. Oh yeah, over here. I'm not one of those people who marks which brace pin goes in which hole. Um, Not that that's a bad thing to do. I just, for me, I never saw the logic in it. So now I want to string up the guitar. the guitar facing me. So with the guitar here, so I'm stringing it up so I can do it from both sides of the neck. My low E. Plug in the guitar. Do my high E. E. Do my A. Go to D. So everything we just talked about, which took the better part of an hour and a half, actually happens all inside about 10 minutes at the bench doing the discovery and that kind of thing. Now I'm at a point where I have strings on the guitar. I'm going to leave these loose for a minute because I want to get an idea of where my relief is on the guitar. Now I'm going to use a straight edge because the straight edge with the top of the frets is how I'm going to discover what that is. So I'm holding the guitar in playing position. I'm using Buck's feeler gauge step. So that's there. I'm sighting the neck. I can see I've got a significant amount of relief. Not as much as I had before. This looks like it's probably about 10 or 12 thousandths of relief. Maybe a little bit less. Check with a 9. A 9 gauge screw. a 10 goes through. It might even be higher than that, but I don't really care because I know I want it to be less than that. So at this point, I'm going to
Just me,
tighten
or
up the
is the
neck a little
audio
bit.
gone generally?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Doug.
Oh, okay. Did you hear me talking about adjusting the relief where we were
Yeah,
at?
you haven't cut out.
Yeah,
Oh,
you're
okay.
back now. You're back.
Although I am
So-
in your shop hiding. No.
So the relief was higher than 10 thousandths. I want it to be about 4 or 5 thousandths. So I'm going to tighten up on the neck a little bit to get me to that point there before I go any further. And I'm a lot tighter. So I'm going to check 6 thou. A 6 thousandths does not go through, so I'm tighter than 6 thou. A 5 thousandths does not go through. A 4 thousandths does. Can you see that from your vantage point?
I can see the.
So about that point that we were talking about before, that spot between 7 and 8 and 9, that spot right at the 8th fret or so, being the center point of the pull of the strings is where I'm getting through. I'm not able to get through at 7. My 7's getting caught. I can get through at 8, and then I can't get through up here at 10. If I went one step higher, I can't get through any of them. So I'm at 5 thousandths of an inch there. My 5 thousandths doesn't go through at all. My 4 thousandths gets caught at 7, but it goes through at 8. And 8 and 9 it goes through, and at 10 again it gets caught where I can't get past that fret. So that's the center span of my fingerboard. It's also the center span of the relief. Even though we're only measuring the relief up to the body joint on most acoustics, it's not the center point of that we would be measuring at. We would be measuring at the center point of the span of the fingerboard, because remember that when we're talking about relief, we're talking about the peg head pulling forward this way along the full length of the fingerboard, and that fingerboard is bowing in a pretty uniform curve all the way up to the end of the fingerboard. We might measure it by measuring the two high points of that, and on a guitar where you're measuring relief this way, there may be a high point somewhere in here that it reaches a high point and then gets a little bit of fall away. On this guitar, there was very little fall away. So, but there is some fall away that I'm seeing now that the guitar is at string tension with a whole lot less relief. So if I were to take a really thin one of these, I can see that my fall away goes probably right up into about the 15th fret, 16th fret. I can't get through there even with the smallest feeler gauge. 16, yeah, I can't get through the 16th fret. So my fall away begins at the 16th fret and only looks like it falls down here towards the end of the fingerboard by 1 or 2 thousandths, which was confirmed by our relief gauge when we were measuring the distance of the fall away. Some guitars have a lot more fall away. Others have a very slight amount of fall away. This has apparently very little. Now, if I'm looking at the bridge saddle, I don't know if this is going to come through on Zoom. Maybe you can come in close. I have yet to measure the height of the strings where I need them to be or want them to be. But if I'm looking at the saddle, that slight incline from the back of the saddle to the front of the saddle means that all of these strings are leaving the saddle at the front edge of my saddle, giving me a demarcation point that's uniform across the front. So now I have something I can measure against in order to set the string length compensation when I get there. Remember, first thing in order of operations was relief. We have our relief set. Now I want to measure the height of the strings off the 12th fret. I'm actually now at about 5/64ths on the treble side, maybe a little bit more, 5.5, which is kind of where I want to be. I'm at a lot taller on the bass side than I want to be. I'm at about almost 5/64ths. I would want to be at 4/64ths on the treble side. So we're a little bit higher than I want to be on the treble side, a little lower on the bass side. I may have taken off a little bit of extra material when I was shaping the top of the bridge there, but I'm not too low yet. I'm at about 5.5, almost 6/64ths here. I'm at 5/64ths there. So now I can adjust the bottom of the saddle to get me to where I want to be. Before I do that, I will loosen the string so I can get the saddle out of the guitar. So here, I pull up the saddle. Slip it out. I can mark, if I want, which way it faces forward. I already have the marks on the front of the bridge from where the strings were leaving the saddle so that I can, but I also marked the front of the saddle so I know which one is which. Now, I was at 5.5/64ths, almost 6/64ths on the bass side, and I was 5/64ths on the treble side, maybe a little bit more. So I am going to use, you can use any number of things that you want to mark a saddle. I have one of these, which is the old LMI thing that you can put down, and I can mark a 32nd of an inch, to remove the saddle from the saddle there if I want it. If I want to do less than that or more than that, you can also use your STUMAC or any dial caliper, digital dial caliper. So let's say for now, I only want to remove half that from, so I only want to remove a 32nd of an inch, not even a full 32nd of an inch. There we go. So for now, let me just remove a 16th of an inch, which is 31 thousandths, half a 32nd. So like using my 31 thou there, I can use the end of my STUMAC, put it down here. I'll use the end of my STUMAC thing just to mark where I am, 31 thousandths, 31 thousandths. Do the same here, same here. Get me closer to my final measurement. Back into the tool room. Yes. This, many of you will probably recognize, is a sliding vise that was originally sold with the luthier's, whatever was luthier's friend, luthier's, was a bridge making jig that, it came with these sliding vices. I'm sure it's still sold by somebody somewhere. I don't know who. I think Stu Mac. Stu Mac might release them, for all I know. What I do is set them right to the pencil marks, right at the top of that. So only that's protruding is the amount of material I want to remove. I use a little piece of wood to slip through the other side. If I want to increase or decrease the amount, I can do it that way to get to the right measurement. When you get the right measurement. I didn't need my mask. It's over there. No, you're good. You're far enough away. So I'll set that in there, push it through the bottom, just so the only part that's protruding is the amount of material I want to take off. I grab a pair of pliers. So I get to where I want the right amount sticking out for the material I want to remove, and that's sticking out there. Then close that one. Close those dust ports. And open up this one. I don't know if you can still hear me over the machines, but so that was it. That's all it took to remove that material from the bottom. And
Doug,
I have a perfectly
are you concerned
uniform.
with taking material off that little vise that you're holding it with while you're sanding?
No. I mean, I'm sure some does, but you can see that I'm right to the pencil line where I was.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
We got right to the
I have
pencil
one of
line.
those. It seems like a pretty tough sort of material.
It is a tough sort of material. I, at one point, once I realized that this is the way I wanted to remove material from saddles, that I went out and bought a whole truckload of them. I have like 11 of them in here. I have, yeah, I have them all up in here. You can see them all up there,
Oh yeah. 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 Yeah.
you know. But you can see here that, you can see this one here has been used for some time. This one here has been used for a lot longer.
Oh, yeah.
And there will be material that eventually comes off of it. But
Yeah.
it comes off in just a couple of thousands at a time. This one's got to be 30 years old.
Oh,
So
that's
this
not
one
very much
obviously,
over 30 years.
yeah, it's not a lot, you know. So, I don't know if I have an unused one up here. Let me see if I have it. Yeah, this
But
one's
for each
unused.
saddle, it's not a significant amount, and it doesn't stop the surface from being flat.
No, in fact, you can see here, I've been using this one for probably about 8 or 10 years, and it's really not that much material that's come
Okay.
off of it.
Cool.
You know, yeah, they will, and there are actually times where here's another example. Because of what I'm doing with it, sometime I'll chew up. If I'm cutting something weird and I'll chew up something like on here, and I'll want to go clean it up and square this up, because the way this works is, of course, it's just two pieces that are getting sandwiched
Yeah,
together
with a
in the
pin,
center. That, you know, sometimes this can get out of square with the bottom. So if I'm going to square it up with the bottom, you'll always wind up making it a little thinner. So this tiny one here has probably just been squared up that many times to be able to get it, you
Sure,
know,
sure,
over,
it makes
over
sense.
the life of it. But yeah,
Yeah.
I have lots of those because they're wonderful.
Yeah,
for
I got
lots
one of those with a
things.
collection of tools. I was wondering what it was actually used for originally. Yeah.
I actually don't know what it was used for originally, because I never used it that way. I couldn't. I know it came with that Luthier's friend thing, and I presume it had something to do with holding saddles while you were working on that thing, or holding bridge flanks, or
Makes sense. Oh, okay.
something to that degree. But I never could figure out what its efficacy was
Oh,
with
now I
that
got a use for
particular
it.
thing. But it's my favorite way of. It's my favorite way of trimming saddles, because it turns it into a, you know, like an 18-second exercise, you know, rather than because the whole concept of sitting there on a flat block doing this
Yeah,
for, you know, for what feels like a generation, for me doesn't really cut it. You know, I just want to be able to zip it
yeah.
right to the height that I'm looking for, and then and get on with the rest of the job. So now I'm going to put the saddle in and double check our height, see how I did. Oh, before I do anything else, I want to get the prop jack out of the guitar, because now I'm dealing with string tension as opposed to simulated string tension, and I really don't want to give prop jacks to customers free of charge with their guitars. Now we did take a lot of material off the top of the guitar, the top of the saddle, and some of the bottom of the saddle. So I want to double check that my relief hasn't been affected. Plus, when you do adjust the relief on a truss rod by engaging the truss rod, you can certainly, it does adjust over time. So before I was at 4, put a 5 in there, it doesn't go through. Put a 4 in there, and it still goes through at the same spot. I'm good. So I'm still at the same 4/1000ths of an inch of relief that I had before. And now double check my saddle height. I'm a smidgen above 5. I'm a smidgen above 4. It's not playing bad. Got a nice height to it. We're just a hair above where we want to be. But I haven't cut the nut yet. So I'm going to cut the nut next. Normally that would just stay up there, but just here so you can see it. So we have 12 to 54 here. So we go to our 54. Again, Piece of leather here to protect the guitar from me. Pull the string out. Make sure I have a nice seat. What I'm doing here is I'm putting the file in the slot, and I'm watching that gap between the second fret and the first fret. Okay. So I'm looking to see that there's a gap there when I'm filing, and that I'm not bottoming out on the fret. That'll get me close to where I want to be. I can do my A string. It should be 46 thousandths. That's where I want to be there. We'll take our final measurements when we're through all those strings. Now 36 thou, same thing. We got a little bit of a gap. Almost touching. That's where I want to stop. Next is going to be 26 thou, so we'll use this here. So again, order of operations was nut only comes after my string height and my relief. I'm going to relieve the back of the slot a little bit on the G so it doesn't catch. Go to my B string. It should be 16 thou. I'll use an 18. Got a tiny gap that I can see some light coming through. Then I go to a 13 to do my 12. Okay. So now I measure where I'm at. I should be about 20. Can we hear that pitch? Anybody out there?
I hear you.
Now what we're hearing is the same pitch if I use a 20,000th gauge. Sounds like a sitar, but it's not bigger than the gap. If it were, that pitch would go from an E still sounds like a sitar, but it would go from an E to an F. And that's what I'm listening for. E still sounds like an E, just sounds like a really lousy E. So I want to come down to 20 thousandths. On an acoustic guitar, I'm going to want to be about 20 thousandths on the low E string. On an electric guitar, I'll be a little bit more, a little tighter. So I'll go to maybe 18, depending on the player, depending on what we're dealing with, sometimes even tighter. In this case, I'm going to start with a 20 because I want a generic setup. So I'm going to go back to my 46 thousandths or my 53 thousandths, 12, 54. I'm going to go to my 54 thousandths and I'm going to cut a little bit of material off. I'm going to start with the position I want, which is somewhere halfway between straight and the angle of the string towards the tuner, halfway in between, which is where they kind of should be. And then I'll give myself a little curve to the back of the nut so it doesn't bind up at the back of the nut. And I'll take off a tiny bit of material and I'll check with my 20. I'm still hearing an E, which is kind of what I want to. So I don't know if I want to go any further. Just a little bit more. There's my E. Just crossed the threshold to F. So I know I'm like at a tight 20 thousandths. If I go to my 18 thousandths gauge, I'm still at E. If I go to 16, I got a definite E. So I'm probably a little tight there. I'm probably closer to 18 for that one, but that's fine. But that'll give me my threshold. I can live with an 18 there. So now if I check with my 18 for my E string, my A string, I'm a little tighter than that. I want to be at 16. Am I looking at that? So I'm a little tighter than that. I might have gone a little too low, but that's. I'm at 15 thou for my A string, which I can live with. So only adjust my E string down to 16. Oh, you're right. Yeah, man, so I'm at 16, 18 there, 16 here. I'm above 16 there. I can hear it as plain as day. So I want to come down on the D string so I'm not higher than the A string. So we're looking at 32. Let's put that there, 35. So my D, take a few strokes off. I'm going to be 16. So we just crossed the threshold off over to the next note. 15. So I got 18, 16, 15. I'm going to shoot for 14 on the G. Maybe a 24th now. Let me put my files back. I'm going from the opposite side, obviously, because of the curvature of the fingerboard. Still hear a G, or whatever that pitch is. Just turned into an A flat, so I know I'm at the threshold. Go to the next string up. Can still hear a B, so let's cut our B string. That's probably at about 12. Yep. So I'm cheating each one by about 1/1000th of an inch. So I start higher and go lower as I go. So here, I can hear an E. It's pretty tall. Let me come in here. I can hear an F. Right where I want to be at 10,000. So I've got from 18 graduated down to 10,000. On that, that should give me a nice, comfortable nut for somebody who's not a heavy player, who's an average bear, so to speak. So now, that feels really good, nice and low. Got a nice steady action, got a nice straight neck, only a few thousandths of an inch relief, got a nice low nut. Everything feels like a dream. The last thing we have to do is set our string length compensation, and we would call this guitar done. And this is where I have the guitar dialed in almost exactly as I want it, with the exception of the string length compensation. And we're going to look at how I set that now, the math behind that. So this is how I set string length compensation for every guitar that I set up on an acoustic guitar. Remember, I like to make sure that it's set up to the way I need it set up, rather than just hope that the saddle is where I need it to be once I've cut it down. So if we're looking at our saddle, which right now peaks up right at the front end of the saddle, so we're going to presume that everything is more sharp than it needs to be. For each string, we're going to measure how sharp or flat each string is, and then we're going to compensate the saddle by the length that's necessary in order to adjust for that. So in essence, we are converting pitch to distance. So we take the distance of a half step, we divide that by 100. Then we multiply that by the cents, sharp or flat for each string, and that equation gives us how much we have to move the point at which the string leaves the saddle in order to correct the string length compensation for that string. Is that clear to everybody?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Okay.
so first thing we need to do is we need to determine how far a half step is. We could do that a number of ways. We could take the scale length of a given guitar and do the math, where if I were to take the scale length of this instrument, roughly, or I can look it up online. I think Martin says these are 25.4. So this one, if I'm measuring from the nut between the G and the D string to the exact center of the 12th fret, almost gives me perfectly 12 and 12 and 5/8 of an inch, almost dead on, which doesn't sound like 25.4 to me. So if I'm at 5/8 of an inch, where's my calculator? If I'm at 5/8 of an inch, that's 0.625. So if I'm at 12.625 and I double that, that would give me 25.250, 25 and a quarter. That would actually be a 25 and a quarter inch scale length, which this actually is pretty close to being. So Martin's 25.4, which it said on the website, is actually incorrect. So this might be not the right scale length, or who knows what's going on there. But it's scale length before the offset, the saddle before the. That could be a change in geometry of the guitar. Remember we were talking about the top being, distended a little bit, where we had this sink in front of the saddle, and that saddle leaning forward a little bit. Could be the location of the saddle slot. Could be lots of different things that are at play here. But if I just went by the website numbers, I would be wrong here. So if I took the 25 divided by 2, if I took the measurement of 12.625 and I multiply that by 2, and I take 25.25 and I divide that by 17.817, let me try that again. I just lost the number. 25.25 divided by 17.817, that would give me a first fret at 1.417 of an inch, 417 thousandths of an inch. So 1.417. Everybody's familiar with the math that I just ran through to find out where the first fret is? .417, roughly. 4175. Let's say half a thousandth between friends, I guess. What do you rid of this? So 1.417 puts me almost dead on, dead center of the first fret. And I couldn't even try, I couldn't have gotten closer than that if I tried by eye. So that's, to me, that now represents the distance of a half step. as it relates to the scale length of this particular guitar. So I now have 1.417. A half step equals 1.417 of an inch. I divide that by 100, which gives me 0.0147, if I'm not mistaken. 0.01417 should be what I'm looking at, right? 0.417, 1.417 divided by 100 gives us, yeah, so 14 thousandths of an inch. Let's get rid of the last two decimal points because who wants to count in 10 thousandths of an inch? So we're at 14 thousandths of an inch equals 1 cent. So we now have the exact distance of how much a cent has to move on a guitar whose saddle is in a fixed position. So if I take my E and I isolate my E on my strobe tuner and I measure that's making sure that we're seated well. And saddle's not leaning forward at all. That that's giving me trouble. Let me see what I've got on B. I've got something going on the saddle here. Let me check to make sure that my saddle's leaning forward enough because I'm getting a negative reading on my ventilation. Also make sure I put that back in where it's supposed to. And this is also why I leave that little bit of extra room on the saddle. I may not have given myself enough forward pitch on the saddle. Let me give myself a little bit more. You can follow me, Phil.
Did you get on?
Yeah. Okay. Let's see how we do now. I think I didn't give myself enough of a forward pitch on that saddle for some of the higher strings because the way the bridge is leaning forward a little bit. So let's try that. Okay. Now, get rid of my mask. That looks a lot better. Yes, because now I'm reading sharp. I'm going to go to E. I'm reading a tiny bit sharp. Let me raise the pitch a couple of cents. That's now reading down. So I'm almost dead on right at the front end of the saddle. I might be just about +1 on my E, which means that it's pretty close to being in tune at the leading edge of the saddle for the high E. That's really interesting to me, but normally we see it back a little farther. And if I go to B, that's reading very sharp. Well, let me bring that back down. So I'm reading quite sharp for there. So if I go up about 3 cents, that's closer to it. 4 cents. Go back to 3. Closer to 3. So I'm on a +3 on the B string. Go to G. Is that coming through that? Well, you can't really even see nobody can see the dial. I thought people could see the dial the way I'm seeing the dial. Was that also the case when you did your chat with Peterson the other day? You couldn't see the dial moving?
Yeah, not very well.
We need section all the quick ones with the zoom lens or something.
So I'm about to go back down.
Other than seeing,
I'm at about +2 on the G, which is interesting to me because normally my B would be set farther back. Or my B would be set farther back. Check my D. I'm moving back down to 0. I'll go back to my G. I'll press my G. I'm closer to 1 on the G. Change that to 1. Go back to my D. Wow. Back to 0. My D is a little sharp by about 2 cents plus 2. So if your saddle is in a decent location, by doing it this way, you should, in theory, always have a positive number because we're cutting from the leading edge of the saddle. A. Also want to check a different octave there because it seems to show up better when I go down an octave. That's sharp. And we got +2 there. There I am. Ooh, +5. I'm +5 on my E. And double check my A. Actually closer to a +3 on the A. So I'm satisfied with that. +3. So now we just do a little bit of math with a calculator, and I should have a perfectly in tune guitar. So here I want to be plus 0.014. Here on the B string, I want to be plus 0.042. Here I want to be plus 0.014. Here I want to be plus 0.028. Here I want to be plus 0.042. And here I want to be plus 0.070 for this particular guitar. And that's not a usual compensation for a Martin guitar that we're normally used to seeing. You know, so if we just copied the old saddle, we would have a customer saying, that doesn't quite sound like it's in tune. So here, I'm going to take my pencil, mark 0.014. I'm going to come over this way.
getting closer to the wall.
And mark 0.014. Then I want to mark 0.042. Mark that back there. Then I want to mark 0.014 again, which is damn close to the front. Then I want to mark 0.028. Then I want to mark 0.042. Then I want to mark 0.070, which is pretty significant considering I only have 100 thousandths of a saddle. If your intonation shows that you're going to move that saddle back 120 thousandths of an inch or 105 thousandths of an inch, it's bigger than the saddle. So obviously you would have a problem. There, I'm marking that to here. And I have marks on the saddle
I can see it.
for exactly, let me take it from there. Exactly where I need to cut those saddle ramps to so that I can be in tune with the guitar. We'll take one more trip to the tool room. Grab the mask. Into the tool room we go. Should probably have done this in the tool room. That would have made more sense. So here, I do this all at the little belt sander. Can you guys hear me while I'm talking with this stuff on or no?
Yeah, it's not too bad.
Can you hear me while that's on?
Yeah, it's not too bad.
Okay. So I do this all at the little 1x30 belt sander. I use the top of the belt sander to cut the curve. Let me try talking before I cut. So I cut the inset of the B string at the top of the belt sander right there. And then I come down here and I cut the rest on the front of the belt sander here, graduated in, graduated in, graduated in. If I needed to do an individual string or I needed to cut in an individual string, I could come up here and use the top of the belt sander. Most of the time, just the B string is cut in that way. And so hopefully Aaron will be able to get in. Let me try doing this. If you just put this down this way and lean on those two legs, you should be able to get a little closer. All right, so here we go. I'm cutting right to the line. relieving the saddle right to the point where I want to be to that string. Then I come down here and I cut from the back of the saddle to the front of the line on the ease, trying to get that shape in the top of the saddle, right to the line. I'll take the time to give myself a little curve at the end of the saddle, and then I'll take off just a little bit of material from the front of the saddle to that line. Same from the back of the ease to the line. The low E, since the D and since the A and the E are pretty, since the A and the E are pretty close to each other, I'm going to try to get those two from the front at the same time. The E is a little farther back. Do a little bit of shaping from the B to the G. Round over the edge. So now I've got the peak of the saddle going right through all of those pencil lines that I have marked for each one of the strings. I'll give it one quick swipe on the top of the saddle just to smooth that over. I will double check that my radius is intact. It is along the full length of the whole saddle. And that's it. Now it just needs to be polished. So I'll take it, put it in a little rice, give it a quick polishing to get rid of the transitions from one to the other, making sure that I don't change the top of the saddle. And just grab whatever piece of paper is here. I think this is 220. And then I'll grab whatever this is that's a little worn. So I'll grab from the other drawer, I'll go from 220 to 2000 because I'm not looking to make this like a finish, but I'm looking to polish it up. And I'll also see the transition from string to string. Get the top of the saddle nice and smooth. Then I'll grab the polishing stick, one of these kind of guys, and polish the whole top of the saddle so it looks nice and shiny. I'm not concerned with the sides that's buried in my saddle flock. And plus I don't want to change the thickness of it, so.
Is that pink one a different grit or something? I don't think I've seen that one before.
They're the same exact grits. I just get them in pink just because if you're dealing with bone, the black stuff has a tendency to get in the little nooks and crannies, and sometimes, you wind up with this. If you're not dealing with a great piece of bone that has kind of a lot of grain to it, all of that black stuff gets into the grain or the fissures in the bone, and it kind of looks a little funky. I found that the pink stuff doesn't show up for some reason.
Okay.
It's pink.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's exactly the same grits.
Okay.
Can I ask where you're getting those from?
From, they are coming from, micro surface finishing products or micro mesh. Micro surface finishing products is their actual name. So here we can see that's, we can see that's pretty shiny. It's just whatever that is, 12,000 grit. You can see the transition from string to string, and that's it, it's done. And it's that quickly that I can get in tune, and I know from the math that I'll be exactly where I need to be. And there's basically, you know, no regrets as far as, you know, getting to the point that I want to be at, that I know I'm perfectly in tune. I'm confident that I'm handing a guitar to a customer, that I'm just hoping he doesn't have a Peterson strobe at home, that he can come back to me and say, but the G string is this, or but the D string is that. So now everything should be complete. I might, in some cases, let me get my, I might choose to, you know, let the guitar settle in overnight to make sure it doesn't need a final truss rod adjustment or something like that. Yeah, depends on how anxious I am to get home for dinner. So, I'm not a string stretcher, never have been. Always kind of considered it my customer's job to wear out their strings. So that is a perfectly tuned guitar. And they don't get more in tune than that, and I only had to do it once. And I didn't have to blow a saddle in order to do it, or I didn't have to tell a customer, well, you know, I had to replace your saddle. It's going to be another $120 or whatever you charge for a saddle. That is the end of a setup. The last thing we do, of course, is remove the strings, which I just do this way. I don't, as if you noticed, I don't play every fret of the guitar up and down the guitar. If I know the frets are level, I know the guitar is not going to buzz. So there's no question to me, if I've done my math right and I've done the numbers right, that I'm not going to have any buzzing strings everywhere. I kind of consider the act after I've done a setup, and I don't mean to, you know, cast shade on any other Looth on the planet, but I have long considered the act of sitting there with a guitar, let me get rid of the strings, sitting there along with the guitar, performative in measure, because it doesn't tell me anything about how a guitar plays. The numbers tell me. I started off talking about setup last time and this time, saying that, in a geometric approach to setting up a guitar, not only are you looking for predictability, but, measurements all together combined. No one measurement means anything in and of itself, but the numbers are always going to tell me a story. And from 5 to 4/64 at 4/1000 relief with a nut height of this, that, and the other thing, and then doing my saddle compensation by running the numbers means I always only get to do it once, and I get to do it correctly the first time, as opposed to on an electric guitar, if we're, setting that up and we're playing the E string and, oh, it's a little bit flat, let me pull the saddle back. And then you go back and you say, oh, it's a little sharp, let me move in the other direction. I don't have that luxury in an acoustic saddle. It's either there or it's not. So for me, the numbers tell me everything. When it's done, if it's a guitar I particularly like, I might take some time to play it for a little bit because I want to indulge myself. But other than doing it just for the purpose of wanting to hear myself play, just because I want to enjoy a guitar, has nothing to do with the setup for me. That's just playtime. So I don't play a guitar when it's done. Probably 60% of the guitars that I set up, as soon as I'm satisfied with the math, the guitar goes in the case, because I don't need to play the rest of the guitar because I already know what the guitar is going to feel like based on the numbers. And then if a customer comes to pick it up and they want a little bit more relief, a little bit less relief, a little bit lower action, a little bit higher action, or whatever, then I'm going to wind up adjusting it, for their preferences. Most of the time it's just a quick, neck adjustment and, off they go. That ends the setup. Does anybody have any questions?
Hey Doug, I had a customer walk in when you were doing the math portion on the string length compensation. Could you run
Yes.
not to the 14th thou for me again?
Can I do what for you? What?
You run through the math there where you came up with those numbers to get to 14,000 per cent.
Oh, yeah, gladly. So here it is real quick again. So when we're calculating string length compensation, when we're looking at, let me get the guitar out of the way. Well, let me keep the guitar there because I didn't need it. So when we're calculating string length compensation, the concept here is that we are converting pitch to distance. So if we were to take, probably should have grabbed a different whiteboard and left that there, but if we were to take the distance of 1/2 a step or a semitone, and we take that, and the formula is this: you take a 1/2 step, you divide by 100, that equals 1 cent. That's the simple math right there. Now you convert that by saying how far is a 1/2 a step. That's going to change depending on the guitar. A Paul Reed Smith versus a Fender Strat versus a Martin guitar is going to be different. We discovered here that even though Martin's website, I believe, tells me that this is a 25.4-inch scale, we did a quick measurement of the distance from the nut right at the leading edge of the nut to the 12th fret, gives us it was dead on to be 1 5/8, like perfectly, right to the center of that fret. I couldn't have done that better if I tried, because I'm right at the leading edge of the nut, and I'm at 1 5/8. So that would be 12.625. 12.625 of an inch to my 12th fret times 2 gives me 25.250 of a scale length. So this Martin is not 25.4 of a scale length if I'm measuring it from the nut to the 12th fret and doubling it. I'm 25.25 for this particular guitar. So every guitar is going to be different in that number, depending on what the actual scale length of a guitar is. And we measure that by calculating the string nut to the 12th fret and doubling it to tell us what our scale length is. So here, if we're 25.250, we take that, we divide that by 17.817, which we now know is the quote-unquote rule of 18 as actually calculated by the square root of 2 to come up with the position of our first fret, which is 1.417, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So 1.417 is actually the distance of a half step as it relates to the geometry of a guitar. You with me?
I'm with you.
So the distance from here to the first fret is 1.417. When I measure how out a given string is, I took my strings before E, A, D, G, B, and E, and I forget what the numbers were, but I might have been +1 sharp on the high E. I might have been +3 sharp or something on the B. I was +1 sharp on the G. I might have been +3 on the D. Might have been +4 on the A, and I might have been +5 on the E. So that's how many cents sharp I was for each string when I calculated the strings according to the leading edge of the saddle, which I cut down in order to eliminate the factory preloaded offsets or compensation because I didn't trust it. And we can actually take a look at how different they are. But those numbers are telling me how many cents sharp I am. And then I take this formula, which is the half step. I divide that half step, 1.417, divide that by 100. That means that every cent sharp is 14 thousandths of an inch for each cent equals 1 cent. So if I'm 1 cent sharp, that means I have to lengthen that string by 14 thousandths. If I'm 3 cents sharp, you take that number, 0.014, multiply it by 3, and you get 0.042. So I have to move my B string back 42 thousandths in order for it to be in tune at the 12th fret. My G was only 0.01, if it was, I don't remember. 0.014. My G was 0.042 because it was 3 thousandths. My A being 4 thousandths of an inch had to be increased 0.0142 or what 0.014, yeah, 0.0142 we'll call it, times 4. So that would be moved 0.056 thousandths. If it were, I don't remember what the number was. Then the 5 thousandths would, I think that was 0.070. Because I would add just another 14 thou to 56, which would give you 0.070. So now I know how far back I need to move the E string because it was 5 cents sharp. 5 cents equals 70 thousandths of an inch. that changes for each scale length that you would have a particular guitar for, or how far the distance of a half step given a particular guitar is for the purposes of finding your scale length of the guitar. So we're basically taking the scale length of a guitar, dividing it into a half step, by dividing it by 17.817, the rule of 18 as we know it, and determining what the length of a half step is. That then is divided into 100, so we can then take our pitch reading, if we're whatever sense sharp or whatever sense flat for a given string. If I cut the saddle to the leading front edge of the saddle as an opening gambit to doing my setup, I will always know that I'm in theory going to be sharp, and I always have to move it back. If you do that and you wind up with strings that are flat, something's wrong. The saddle might even be in the wrong location because it's still reading flat, which means it's too long, which means the saddle has to be moved forward somehow. You can do that by widening the saddle, but this way you know what you're up against when you do your reading. If you cut your saddle first to the leading edge of the saddle, and when you were with your customer, when we found out after I put my saddle in, when the strings pulled forward a little bit, the saddle might have been leading a little bit too far forward, and my strings were getting cut off at the back end of the string because I didn't give enough of an incline, just enough to get the strings to come off of the leading edge of the saddle. I probably undercut it a little bit, and what I probably had was a saddle that the string was still being measured from the back of the saddle because it wasn't tall enough in the front. So I wanted to make sure I was leaning towards the front a little bit. So I took a tiny bit off, and not so much that it would even affect the overall playability of the guitar or the, where I'm at in terms of action. If I check the action again, I'm right at 4/64ths of an inch, and I'm right at 5/64ths of an inch on the bass side. It couldn't be more perfect for a Martin, So that's the calculation of the math as it relates to that. It's actually it gets to look complicated because there's lots of numbers floating around, but the simplest equation to remember is the distance of a half step divided by 100 equals 1 cent. Then whatever you are, plus or minus whatever number of cents times this number, that you come up with. So a half step divided by 100, and then you just measure. You could be, if you were in theory, let's say you were at a 25, Fender's 25.5, right? So 25.5, if it did turn out to be actually measuring 25.5, if I take that number and divide it, or divide it by 17.817, that would give me a distance of 1.431 of the distance of a half step, which then would give me 14.3 thousandths of an inch for every half step from there. If I'm at a Gibson, where I'm 24 3/4, and I divide that by 17.817, then I'm at 138, 1 inch and 389, which means if I divide that by 100, that means that I'm only at 13 thousandths for every half step. So I get to dial it in perfectly for each guitar rather than just hope I'm in the ballpark. And with an acoustic saddle, like we said, if we have an acoustic saddle and we cut our saddle to that spot for that particular string, and I'm off, and I wind up saying, oh, that saddle's way too sharp. I need to elongate it to back here to being in tune. I've now blown my saddle because that height of that string will no longer match the height of the two strings around it, because then I'll have a saddle that will have a radius that instead of being a uniform radius, we'll have a saddle that dips down for that string. And we've all seen that on acoustic guitars when somebody's tried to adjust the intonation because you wind up with a string that's no longer in line with the break points of your other string. Did I clear that up?
Yeah, it's perfect. Thanks, man.
Okay, so we're into this for 3 hours right at the dot, which I think was probably 16 hours shorter than the last one we did.
A little bit.
Yeah, I set up 180 guitars during that. No.
But like I said, to talk about it,
No, that's good.
How long would that have taken you, Doug? Like without explaining everything?
oh, without explaining everything, that from start to finish is probably a 45-minute exercise.
Yeah.
You know, to do a complete setup on an acoustic guitar with taking all my measurements, with doing, like I said, the discovery in the beginning is what tells me what I need to do.
Yeah.
How much material I need to take off, how far out the guitar is, how cooperative the truss rod's going to be, how flexible of a neck I have, how much top distension I have in terms of top deflection. All of that stuff takes place first, rather than just saying, oh, this is a guitar that needs to be set up. Let me take the strings off.
Right. And the physical
And then-
work is actually
Yeah.
less than, yeah.
And then, but if you don't do all of the measurements first, then your setup becomes a trial and error process where you have to tweak this, and you have to go back and tweak that, and then why is this off? And then, oh, I cut my nut too low, now I have to make a nut. And oh, my saddle is at the right height that I need, but my G string is not, is too flat, and I need to sharpen it. Or my B string is too flat, and I need to too sharp, and I need to flatten it. But then your profile is already cut, your string height's already cut. All of that information is not feeding the process. So I'm about, when I sit down and do a setup on an acoustic, it's about 15 minutes of time taking my measurements and putting it on the work order.
Right.
And then once,
What wire you got, dude?
Oh, shit. That's the code.
0000000. Yeah.
All right, this is Spencer.
I think it's Spencer.
Yeah.
oh,
Doug, how did you do this before? I mean, did you just come to this naturally, or?
how did I do this before what?
Well, I mean, did you always do it this way, this setup process?
I've been doing it this way probably for the better part of 30 something years, 35
Oh, okay.
years.
Right.
And when I first started, it was a discovery to get to this point. So I was doing it like the rest of us were doing it. I was taking the strings off of a guitar, putting strings on a guitar, you know, and starting to measure things and put things where I kind of need it, and then struggling with the guitar, trying to quote unquote coax the guitar towards a setup that I wanted. And it was usually backing myself or painting myself into a corner with something where I'd get to the end of it and go, well, I kind of dialed it in, you know, and hope the customer doesn't, you know, own a Peterson, or hope the customer doesn't notice that there's too much relief in order, because I cut the strings saddle too low, or if I cut the nut string. And it was just this process of elimination of, you know, saying there's got to be a better way than, you know, trying to feel your way through it. Because for me, that will work, and it will always work. But to me, it never produced predictable results. Where this way, I can, if I have a Martin on the guitar, if I have a Les Paul on the guitar, if I have an offset, you know, electric, or it doesn't matter what, a banjo, I know from the beginning of the setup exactly what I'm going to wind up with it at the end of the setup, provided A, B, and C are true. If the frets are level, if there's nothing structurally wrong with the guitar, you know, and knowing where I'm at in terms of the different aspects. And like I said, for an electric guitar, it's very much the same process and order of operations, except we're dealing with, in most cases, with the exception of cutting a nut, the ability to be able to turn a screw in the opposite direction if we went too far. Or sometimes it's like, oh, I got everything dialed in perfectly, and then you look down and you notice that the strings are almost sitting on top of the pickup. So I know for a fact that my string length compensation is off because the strings are pulling on the pickups are pulling on the string. So it's not a matter of, it's just a matter of making sure I don't make mistakes along the way. With an acoustic guitar, I don't have the luxury of undoing most of that stuff with the exception of loosening or tightening a truss rod. That's where it all ends in terms of your redoability. So.
Cool. Good stuff. Really good.
Thank you.